This lecture continues the discussion of general principles of research ethics by focusing on questions that mainly concern human relations in research, between a researcher and other researchers, and between a researcher and institutions. We discussed three main issues that are of paramount importance in research: conflict of interest, confidentiality, and fairness in evaluations. Conflict of interests is a situation in which an agent, an individual, or an organization is involved in multiple conflicting interests, and serving one would work against another. In a human relation, it occurs when the primary interest of an agent, the principal goal, interferes with the secondary interest of another agent who has precise duties and responsibilities towards the principal goal. Typically, the agent has to express judgment or decide on behalf of the principal goal. A classic example is the case in which an individual is part of a jury that must select one among several participants in a competition. As an example, in the context of research, a member of the program committee has to recommend acceptance or rejection of papers submitted to a conference. The primary interest, principal goal, is to choose the best papers to make the conference esteemed. But suppose that one of his or her close collaborators submits a paper. A conflict of interests arises because the primary goal, choosing the best contributions, interferes with the secondary goal, supporting and promoting own collaborators. In conclusion, a conflict of interests requires three main elements: an agency relation between a delegating agent and another agent. In the example, the conference, viewed as an agent, delegates the program committee members to evaluate and decide. The presence of a secondary interest in the delegated agent. In the example, the agent aims at supporting and promoting his or her own collaborators. An interference of the secondary interest with the primary interest. In the example, in the context of paper selection for a conference. The previous discussion naturally brings to the notion of potential conflict of interests. A potential conflict of interests is a situation in which the secondary interest of an agent can, in the future, interfere with the primary interest of another agent towards whom the former has precise duties and responsibilities. A possible countermeasure to the insurgence of actual conflicts of interests consists in making the possible interests that may conflict explicit. In the example of conferences, the authors who submit papers are normally asked to indicate the members of the program committee they have conflict with. Likewise, the members of the program committee are asked to indicate which submitted papers are authored by researchers they have conflict with. Conflicts of interests should always be avoided. Manifestations of conflict of interests in research are serious misconducts which can damage the image of the agent and the organization in which he or she operates. Sometimes this reputation damage may even be caused by an apparent conflict of interests, which should also be avoided. An apparent conflict is a situation in which, although the secondary interest of the agent does not interfere with the primary, a reasonable external subject would think that an interference exists, and therefore the professional's judgment is likely to be compromised. The reason to avoid even apparent conflict of interests is just to avoid any reputational damage. Confidentiality is another key ethically sensitive issue in research. Researchers are very often exposed to confidential information, and it is expected that they keep it confidential, not only avoiding any deliberate disclosure, but also protecting the information from any possible access by unauthorized individuals. For example, a paper submitted for publication must be kept by a reviewer as confidential information. It should never be copied and distributed to others. It should also be kept in places that cannot be accessed by others. To protect the parties involved and precisely define roles and responsibilities, confidentiality terms are often explicitly stated. For example, I will comment the document Policy on Roles and Responsibilities in ACM Publishing by the ACM, a major professional society and publisher in the area of informatics. The document contains the following statements. When an author makes a submission, a confidential review process is initiated. Reviewers can expect ACM to acknowledge their efforts in the publication process while maintaining confidentiality of the submissions they reviewed. Notice that this statement is to protect reviewers. The next statements instead describe obligations by the reviewers to protect authors. ACM expects reviewers to comply with several obligations. Maintain the confidentiality of the existence and status of submissions of which the reviewer becomes aware. Not use results from submitted works in their works, research, or grant proposals unless and until that material appears in other publicly available formats, such as a technical report or as a published work. Not distribute a submission to anyone unless approved by the editor handling the submission. Maintain the anonymity of the other reviewers should they become known to that reviewer. Breach of confidentiality by one of the parties involved is especially bad because others rely on the assurance that the information they provide is not shared without their consent. A last ethically sensitive issue we discuss here has to do with fair judgment. As we discussed elsewhere, researchers are often involved in evaluations. It may be a paper being evaluated for publication or a young researcher's application being evaluated in a hiring or in a promotion process, or a research proposal submitted for funding. Fair judgment means that the individual involved in the evaluation should be objective and should not be biased by prejudice, personal interests, preferences, and beliefs. For example, a paper should receive fair treatment also in the case it does not follow the mainstream approaches that are currently hot in a research area. Judgment should never be biased by gender, country, institution, or any other personal information about the individuals associated with the subject being evaluated. In the case of comparative judgment, fairness also means uniformity of the evaluation criteria and of the mindset across all subjects. So far in this lecture, we focused on ethical issues arising in the relations among individuals involved in research. Researchers should behave ethically also with respect to the research community. We observe that the research community is by and large self-managed by researchers. It is based on trust and integrity. Researchers have an obligation to sustain the research community not only by contributing to advancing their own research, but also ensuring that new generations of researchers are formed, diffusing results and making them available for further advances, reviewing others' work, and so on. Proper balance between effort allocation in own research and service to the community can vary across individuals, and in particular, it varies according to seniority. But denying any kind of support to community activities is a misconduct. As a final remark, misconducts not only damage the reputation of the individual, but shed a negative light to the organization in which the individual operates and to the research community at large. This is why communities often have their own code of ethics and may react in case of misconduct.